Welcome, everyone. My name is Hallie Caldwell, and I'm a member of the Quad Education team. I want to thank you all for joining us today for our webinar on how to craft an authentic application narrative. We have two fantastic panelists with us today who are consultants for Quad Education and work with students and families on their college applications. Quad Education is an admissions consulting company, and we work with students and families starting from middle school all the way through the end of high school as students are preparing for college, trying to decide what classes to take in high school, extracurriculars, studying for the SATs, ACTs, all the way through deciding what schools you want to apply to, deciding who to ask for letters of recommendation. We help with personal statements, really everything until you get your acceptance letters. So again, I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. So today we'll start by introducing our two panelists, and then we'll talk about what an application narrative is and why it's important. We'll talk about how to go about determining your application narrative, and then how to ensure your application documents tell a cohesive story, how to weave everything together. We'll go over some tips on developing an impactful narrative. And then we'll open things up for a Q&A. So if you have questions during this webinar, feel free to pop them in the Q&A box and we'll get to those at the end. Additionally, we will be recording this webinar. So keep an eye out in your email in the next few days and we'll send a recording over to you for you to refer back to. You'll also be able to find it on our website in a couple of days. All right, with that, I want to introduce Dr. Nick and Aaron. They're two of our fantastic admissions consultants here at Quad, and they have a ton of experience. Nick, can I have you introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Good evening, everybody. My name is Dr. Nick Accrocco. I've been with Quad for a little over a year and a half. Prior to that, I worked in admissions at Vanderbilt University, my alma mater, and also the University of Pennsylvania within the Ivy League. I've also worked on the high school side in several different high school communities and as director of college counseling for 7 years. So I have lots of great experience with Quad students, and we can help you with every step of the application from the beginning and figuring out what that looks like to the ultimate end goal of a college list and ultimately a strategy. So we hope tonight we can give you some tips and sort of clarification about what the essay is and what it is not.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Dr. Nick. Erin, can I have you introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. My name is Erin Bailey. I went to Boston University for my undergrad and studied film and television. And then I went and I worked in business for a while, but decided to go back to school for education. And I went to Teachers College at Columbia University. And so I've been in education for a very long time now, working with students, working with their families. I've been with Quad for about a year. I work with Columbia University as an alumni admissions ambassador also, which is really fun getting to know the students who are applying and answering all of their questions about the admissions process. I'm super excited to be here with you guys tonight, and I hope you get a lot out of our webinar tonight.
Awesome. Thank you both so much for being here. It's a pleasure to have you. So we'll dive right in and talk about what is an application narrative and why is it important? Erin, you want to start us off?
Sure. So the narrative tells admissions who you are as a person beyond your numbers. I think it's really important to remember that admissions is not just interested in your test scores. They're not just interested in your GPA. They are interested in who you are. So what qualities are you bringing to their campus? They are very strategic about bringing people who have a perspective to bring, who will have interesting discussions in class, who will be great roommates, who will be leaders in their community. And so you really want to show beyond just your academics, who you are and what you're bringing, right? So colleges are going to receive thousands of applications. And so telling a story about who you are that goes beyond just what you can do academically is really going to make you stand out. And so you want to really bring all of the pieces together throughout every component of your application. You want it to be cohesive and really paint a complete 360-degree view of who you are, right? So some of the things are pretty set in stone, right? Your test scores, your grades, but there's a lot that you can do throughout the process through your essays, both your Common App personal statement, as well as your supplementals that can really connect the dots for everybody so that they can see kind of where you have started your journey, how you've developed along your journey, and then where you end, where you're going with that journey, and how their school, right, is kind of the next step for you in that journey.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what Erin said. And I think a lot of times what families may not realize is that we have lots of very talented students who have lots of great skills, lots of great grades, lots of great curriculum, great test scores, if that's going to be applicable. But this is one part of the application that a student still has control over in their senior year, because that's probably when they're going to be drafting it up. But as Erin said, like, what's the authentic voice that you're going to bring to the table? I've had essays that made me laugh. I had essays that made me cry. I had essays that inspired me. I had essays that made me think, I can't believe you're writing about this topic. So it's a whole gambit. But we're going to talk about some of the ways in which we work with developing that narrative with our students, and basically trying to figure out what it is that they want to say. One thing that you'll definitely hear many times from this presentation is show, don't tell. What I used to say in my admissions territory when I was recruiting is I would say, when it comes to your essay, it's like I'm looking at you and you're sitting across from my desk, and I say, okay, what are you all about? And you say, all right, this one time. And it could be a story, and that story could take place over seconds, could take place over a much longer period of time, could be, lots of years. It just depends on what you want to say and how you want to say it. But there's not just one way to do this. And I think that's the thing that is often a misconception, is there's not one type of essay they're looking for. There's a lot of different ways to approach this. But what we try to do is individualize that approach with every student with whom we work.
Absolutely. I think making sure you're also tying in that essay with how you're talking about your work and activities, how you want your teachers to be portraying you in your letters of recommendation is also an important thing to think about. I think you both hit it right on the head. All right, so crafting your application narrative. Let's talk a little bit about how to go about determining what that will be.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that you have to remember is that they're going to get a copy of your transcript. So they know what courses you took, they know what grades you got in those courses. They're going to hear from what you're like in the classroom from your teachers. They're going to see your extracurricular activity list based on either just what you fill out in the application itself, or a resume or activity sheet that you add as a supplement to it. So they're going to get all that information. It's okay to highlight one particular class, one particular assignment, one particular activity. But this is also not the time to basically rehash your entire application in the actual essay when they're getting information elsewhere. So when I sometimes will work with students, they'll write, well, I took AP this course. Well, I know you did. You took it I saw that a couple pages ago in your transcript. What I'd rather hear is, I decided to challenge myself in this course because of my interest in blah, 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 blah. It could also be something that is not academic at all. It could be an extracurricular activity. Could be an experience that you had. It could be a book that you read. There's a lot of different ways to go about this, but what the deans of admission and the committee are looking for is they want students who are interested in the world and interesting to others. So there's lots of different ways to make that happen. And that's what we try to do with each student, is kind of work with them, figure out what they're interested about, what they're trying to say to the committee, and find a vehicle to communicate that through the essay.
Yeah, Nick, I totally agree. And I think also, thinking about as an application narrative as a whole, thinking about creating a cohesive story that really ties in all of the pieces together. And part of that is about editing and highlighting, right? So for example, if you did 3 weeks on the tennis team, that doesn't necessarily need to be something that you really point out and highlight as just kind of random activities, but rather really thinking about, if you can have like an end goal that you're working towards, really thinking about how all those pieces fit together, almost kind of like a mission statement, so thinking about how are your courses working in conjunction with your activities, what stories can you tell that really explain your journey and your trajectory.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's talk about knowing your application components.
Yeah. So,
awesome.
Yeah.
Go for it, Nick.
Oh, well, so one thing I always talk about in admissions committee was, I would have this idea, and this isn't necessarily like something that had to happen, but sometimes I would say, what a beautifully organic file. Everything just kind of echoes, everything just kind of hits. It doesn't have to do that necessarily, but it's important to just look at the different pieces of data that you've already written. So one things I would do in the high school setting is, for any of you, for any of those people out there who are about to join ninth grade in the fall, or maybe already have, what I would say the second day of high school, I'd say, how many of you by show of hands started your college application? And they would all look at me a little puzzled and said, you did yesterday. So that doesn't mean that every single day is vital and all that, but of course, you're starting to write that narrative. You're starting to write the extracurricular list. You're starting to write the, those grades and those test scores as you go along. So a ninth grader has their highest level of control over the application because they haven't written it yet, but they're probably their lowest degree of interest. But as a senior, they have their highest level of interest, but their lowest degree of control because time is kind of gone. So it's like these variables kind of switch. So what's important to do is, it's okay to not know what you want to major in or where you want to go. That's totally fine. But just setting up that foundation in 9th and 10th grade. So when you get to the later years, you've got that strong foundation to build upon it, and then start to say, okay, I'm more of a STEM student, or I'm more of a humanities student, or maybe I really want to pursue arts or athletics. So as we go through, we just work with the students each step of the way so that we figure out exactly kind of where they're going. And that's ultimately how we craft these applications, how we look at, here's what the transcript says, here's what the test scores say, and here's what the extracurricular list says, and also what the essay says about all of that. There's not one particular type of applicant that you have to be. There's many ways to gain admission and be very compelling to admissions committee, but that's what we try to do with each student, is figure out exactly what that looks like for them.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Nick. I also think, not every decision that you make in high school has to be towards fulfilling your college application. Obviously, high school is the time that you really want to experiment with what you like. And not necessarily, this is all about being authentic, right? So really digging into your authentic interests and really following those, getting passionate about what lights you up and going deep with that. Stepping up as a leader in those areas, taking those opportunities to really get invested. And, as an added bonus, it looks so awesome on your resume, on your activities list, when we see a clear path of interest that goes deep and has really inspired you to become a leader.
All right, Erin, I really like that you touched on pursuing things outside of what you think will look good on a college application. I think that's something that we've talked about in many webinars. And I know, Dr. Nick, you've talked about as well, as colleges want to see that you're passionate about something and you're following your interests, and you shouldn't be doing something just because you think it will look good on your college application. It should be coming from an authentic place.
Yeah, I would
for
just say,
sure.
oh, go ahead, Erin. Yeah.
I was going to say, it's something that you can't really fake, authenticity. Like when you see a resume where obviously somebody is just trying to check off all the boxes, it's really apparent, especially to admissions committees who do this all the time, thousands of applications every year. It's really obvious when a student is being authentic and when they're not.
Yeah, and I would just say real talk. I mean, I remember when I was in high school myself, I've worked in high schools, I've worked in admissions. We all know that people sometimes say, I'm only doing this to help my college application. And while that's part of it, they want you to have something to say and something to be interested in and whatnot. You should be looking for things that you authentically enjoy. And there's lots and lots of paths to victory. So a lot of times it's not that it's not like we're in committee and Erin and I are going, well, do they have this and this and this and this and this? Sometimes they're really focused in one area. Sometimes they're that well-rounded student. But again, it's that interested in the world and interesting to others, like caring about something. But if it's something that you're doing that you're not enjoying, let's find something that you do enjoy. Let's find something that can also contribute to that. It's not one particular thing they're looking for. They're looking just for, commitment. That has many forms.
For sure. And I think oftentimes students or families are kind of looking for this magic formula. If I take this many AP classes and I plug in this many activities and I'm president of A and B, then will I get into Harvard? And it's like, well, maybe, maybe not. There's no magic formula. It is so individual and personalized. And that's why I think having, an admissions consultant can be really helpful, because it is so unique to each individual student.
Exactly.
Well said. All right, so let's dive a little bit more into what exactly each of the application components are. So just have as a good base layer for the rest of our webinar.
Yeah, I mean, what I often tell students and families is that when you look at these components right now, we have objective data and subjective data. So the common application forms, that's going to be basically part one of the common app is demographic information, name, address, phone number. Here's my parents. Here's my siblings. Here's where I live. You are who you are. That's just part of it. But it does give the admissions committee a lens in which to view the application. Your transcript is your transcript. Every high school has their own wacky grading scale and curriculum and whatnot. So you're evaluated within the context of your high school. So you really can't compare your record to a student from another school. So let's say your high school doesn't have any AP classes offered for whatever reason, but your friend's at a place that's 30. Well, we can't blame you for not being able to take something that wasn't available to you. Test scores, colleges will give a mid 50% range if you submit test scores. If you're in that top 25% of test scores, you're in good shape. If you're in the mid 50%, you're in contention. If you're in that lower 25, they say they take lower the last 25%. That's going to be a harder position. And oftentimes those students might have other attributes about themselves that could bring them over to admission. But they're telling you right now that when you look at that mid 50% in the top 25, 75% of our test scores with mid students start in this area. Letters of recommendation. Many of the places our students apply to with Quad will have one counselor letter of recommendation from the high school and 2 academic teachers. We work with each student to come and figure out what that is. Some students think more letters of recommendation is better. Erin and I can tell you that is not necessarily the case. So if you have an extra one from an employer or someone you did research with, or it's a coach or a homeroom advisor, anything like that, that's probably okay. But I had in my own territory, one student had 9 letters of recommendation, including one for mom, who had very positive things to say about her daughter. Then the office record at Vanderbilt was 21, at Penn it was 42. I thought those were pretty high till I went to University of North Carolina where they got 86. Essays, we're talking all about that tonight. Your final transcript, of course, they want to admit this, they want to enroll the student whom they admitted. It's very rare, but on occasion the student will go, I got in and I don't have to worry about the rest of senior year. That's not the case, but again, very rare, but you want to finish strong, as we say. There could be additional information. These can be things that happen in your family or things that happen in your school. This could also be stuff, if you're applying as an art student, it might be portfolio, or if you're a science student, it might be research or a resume, or even if you're doing, humanities research, that could be a possibility as well. And lastly, of course, the interviews, which to adult ears sounds really, really scary, but more often than not, it's something that, yes, it is evaluative, but it's not necessarily going to be the end all be all. It's a way to keep the alumni engaged more often than not. So it is important to do a good job. It's also important for the student to ask those questions to see if it's the right fit for them. But if you look at this, you can see some of the stuff, this is the number, this is the grade, objective. Their stuff's a little subjective, and that's where we come in.
Awesome. Just a few things to add. Like some more recent trends with test scores is, since the pandemic, there are several schools that have gone test optional. So if you're somebody who struggles with tests, right, that's something to consider. There's also a little bit less emphasis, I would say, in recent years on tests. That's kind of where the trends have been going. Also, with your letters of recommendation, this is an awesome place to be strategic with your narrative, right? So if you are telling a narrative where you are so passionate about STEM, right, then really target those STEM teachers who can really speak to maybe an awesome project that you did, or a way that you really stood out in STEM class or in robotics or whatever it is that you're into. And with the interviews, they are optional, but I always recommend, if you have it in you, to do it, because if you think about it, right, it's a lot harder to say no to somebody that you've met, that you've seen their excitement, that you've seen their passion. So if you have that opportunity, I would definitely go ahead and take it. Absolutely. And your admissions counselor can be a great resource for that, like to do mock interviews and things like that. Definitely having a little bit of rehearsal beforehand goes a long way.
Yeah.
Great.
Awesome. So your overall goal in submitting your application is to communicate why you would be a great candidate, so that your application needs to paint a full picture that demonstrates your candidacy. And I think we spoke a little to this before about really painting yourself as a 3-dimensional person. And I also think it's important not only to think about why this school is right for you and what they're going to do for you, but it's a two-way street. You want to make sure that you are demonstrating to the school, what are you bringing? What are you contributing? What leadership qualities or what values are you bringing to the school that is going to make the campus a better place?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would say, and it kind of reminded me about one thing that a lot of our students will apply to places that have supplemental essays. And these can be things that are, talk about your academic interests and why, what do you want to study and why. But oftentimes, especially at the more selective places, you're going to get a why us. So why are you applying to Penn? Why are you applying to Columbia? And I will say one of the biggest pieces of advice I can give about this is you need to be specific. So for example, my dean at Penn, when we would have an application, we'd have a question that was phrased in these very lofty language, but basically it said, of all the universities and all the land, why are you applying here? And my dean used to always say, are they applying here because of what we have to offer in our community, or are they applying because it's Penn? And the same thing, I'm sure Aaron experiences at Columbia. Columbia's got a pretty competitive marketplace in New York City. You've got Fordham, you got Barnard, you got NYU. There's all these different places there. So when we would see students who would say, I want to go to Penn because Wharton's a great business school, we weren't sitting there in Philadelphia going, golly, got this great business school, but no one knows about it. Wait, there's one student knows it, and the same thing, like New York City has so many opportunities. Yes, what would you like to do with them? What organizations do you want to join? What campus things do you want to join? They know the student teacher ratio is 8-to-1 or what have you. But what there would be a better answer is saying, when I saw Professor Thompson was studying my interest in economic theory, it really got me interested because it'll help me accomplish this later. That's a huge piece of advice, because the really selective places are going to get a lot of people who are applying just to see, but the places are kind of hip to that. How are you a good fit? Why, of all the places where you're applying here, aside from the reputation or whatnot, show that fit with the community? It's so essential.
For sure. And I'll just add on, like when we say specific, like we mean really specific. Like the more proper nouns you have in your essay, names of research projects, names of professors, names of classes, if you can find online a syllabus from a particular course and you can mention particular things that you want to learn and how that's going to help you in your future in whatever you want to do, like that's awesome. Like the more specific, the more you are demonstrating interest, right? And the more you can demonstrate interest, the more the school is going to understand that you are legitimately interested, and that makes them legitimately interested in having you on their campus.
Absolutely.
I think that's very underrated, but fantastic advice. All right, so we're going to dive a little bit more into figuring out what you want your application narrative to be. So both a combination of your personal statement, but also how you want the schools, when they're reviewing your application, to see you. Who are you, and how is that shown throughout all of your application materials?
Yeah, so I would say that when I was doing high school classes with my seniors and we were working on these, what I'd often do would give them an actual college essay from a student who'd written them before, and I got permission, of course, and I would say, okay, I want you to read this essay, and at the end of it, I want you to tell me, what do you know about the student from reading their essay? I said, what sort of adjectives would you use? And so they would say, well, they're, funny, or they're resilient, or they're dedicated, or they're organized, or, or they're that. So this is, again, that show, don't tell. And so what I always say, and I say the same thing to faculty writing letters of recommendation, nouns and verbs communicate a lot more than adjectives. So if you write in your essay, I'm a leader, what does that mean? I mean, as evidenced by what? So one example I've always given is, like, you can write, I really care about helping, younger students, little kids. But a better answer would be, every day at 2:00, I volunteer at the local library to help first graders learn how to read. That's way more specific. And you're saying the same things, but it's that show, don't tell. And so that's the thing is, and now when we're working on these, like what I often do with the students, I say, okay, let's look at your story. Let's look at what you like to do. Let's look at your strengths. How do you spend your free time? How do you hang out with your friends? What do you do during the summer? What sort of things do you read on your own for fun? I mean, is there stuff that you have a hobby? Like I had one student who loved to do glass blowing of all things. I was like, wow, okay, that's kind of scary. I had another student one time, he wanted to be a physics major, but he loved music. His essay was all about building an electric guitar from scratch. So that's really cool. So he's talking about how he has to, like, structure it and get the wood right and the mechanics of it right. So all of this is conveying like not only just a passion for music, but also a passion for the science and the acoustics of it. But he wasn't saying like, I'm really interested in music and I'm really interested in that. He was showing it by showing this creative process. So it can be an essay as simple as that. And again, we've had essays that were Napoleonic triumphs or giant failures. Failure is often a great topic to write about, and I think sometimes students are a little reluctant to do that. But you always learn so much when you fail. There was an NFL player recently, and he said, "Was it a win or a lesson? Not a loss. Was it a lesson?" That can be a great essay topic. But there again, every student's a little bit different. If you're funny, be funny. If you're not, this is not the time for your comedic debut.
Awesome. And, I think these questions are great places to start, to really start thinking about what is it that I want to tell to the admissions committee. And I think oftentimes a big downfall for a lot of students is they don't take the time to think before they start putting their admissions narrative together, right? So really being strategic about like, who am I, right? And depending on the kind of student you are, you may have spent a lot of time thinking about who you are and reflecting on that, or maybe not much at all. But I think it's really important to take some time to think about, who am I and what do I want to communicate about who I am to the admissions committee? What lessons have I learned along the way? What experiences have shaped who I am? Where is it that I see myself headed? Really doing some deep reflection on yourself. A lot of times I'm working with students and they're like, wow, this is like kind of deep. This is really personal. And it's like, well, yeah, it's called a personal statement for a reason. Like it should be personal, right? Like we said, admission really wants to get deep into who you are. And so spend that time, like don't skip the brainstorm, really dig in and explore different possibilities of the different facets of yourself that you want to show.
Yeah, and one quick thing I just noticed in the questions there, with the Common App essay versus the supplemental ones, the Common App essay it's the same Common App essay that goes to every school. They're not looking for you to necessarily show a direct vis-a-vis connection with that school. But when Columbia says why Columbia, or Penn says why Penn, or Michigan says why Michigan, that's got to be specific to the school. And that's something that we work with every student on.
All right. So now we're going to go a little bit deeper into kind of identifying your narrative and talk about how to go about identifying your theme.
Awesome. So while there are many questions you can ask yourself as you're drafting your application narrative, you really want to be able to pick out some themes on your journey, right? So we've talked about how you want to bring all the components together and really thinking about what story does this tell, right? So oftentimes when I'm working with students, I'll kind of get all of their information in front of me. And I think to myself, like, well, what does this story tell? Right? So what does this tell me about where the student has been and where they're going, right? And then emphasizing the parts of their story that help to tell that narrative. So for example, I was working with the student who was very involved in community service, particularly with the refugee community. He came from an immigrant family who was always giving back. So giving was a really important theme to him, always doing community service. He was also very interested in economics. And so we kind of like talked together and worked on kind of like what his mission statement was. And in the end, he was really interested in working with refugee communities on this like economics piece, on helping refugee families get on their feet. And so we really crafted his whole application narrative around this story, highlighting his community service, highlighting the ways in which he would like to use finance to help refugee families, and really creating almost like this mission statement of where he was headed and how that university could help him get there. And in the end, he got in. It was really effective, right? So thinking about how can you take your natural interests, your natural passions, what you have already been involved in, and really create a story about where you're headed.
Yeah, absolutely. And that can be many different things. It's not one specific type of essay. I've gotten lots of emotions evoked from reading them, as I said earlier. And I think sometimes students might read like one of their friends' essays, and then they like their friends better, and they start like second guessing or questioning themselves. And I always say, run your own race, like think about what you're about. That's going to be different from even your friends. So that's one thing that we try to identify is like when I'm working with a student, and as I talk to them and as I look at survey answers and what have you, I start to see certain patterns, and I go, okay, this might be something to focus on. And there's a lot of different approaches that we can take to it. But when I see something that I just kind of, again, I like to use the word echoes. I see that everywhere. So Erin was talking about her student where giving was really important. So that could be something that could be used as the main theme. So that's what we work with.
Great. All right. So organizing your thoughts.
Yeah. So one thing to do is just think about what are ways that you can convey it. And as I said earlier, like anecdotes and stories, those are great ways to just tell what that one moment was, which again could be a few seconds or it could be a longer period of time, depending on what it is. But you're trying to figure out exactly what's the best way to convey what that's all about. And this is something that we're going to have lots of students who apply these places who are very academically talented and have taken really, really hard courses and have gotten really great grades and have really great test scores. But you're trying to figure out what's the story about the student behind the scenes. What's that look like? And again, that's going to be different things for different students. So it's not one type of thing that you have to do. I also would caution students about this desire to, and I hear it all the time, stand out. Because sometimes like they'll do something really wacky to like try to get the admissions committee attention, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But what I try to do is when I'm reading an essay from a student, I'll think, okay, what do I think about this, me myself as a former admissions officer, but I also think about the personalities in my office. And I think, with my colleagues with whom I work, and everyone had different backgrounds and what have you. And I try to think about how they might interpret it as well. And sometimes like I would read an application. I'm sure Erin's probably been in a similar situation where I felt really one way about an applicant, and then my co-worker like weighed in and I changed my mind. And that was really, helpful. So they always use that word holistic, and that means everything is kind of part of the discussion. Everything's kind of part of the package, as it were. So we just got to figure out exactly, okay, you've got the great grades, you got the great test scores. So what's going to give your story to the committee when they go in there and present in front of everybody else?
Awesome. And just one thing I'll add is that sometimes as I'm helping students to organize their thoughts, if the student has a strong indication of what they want to do in the future, or kind of like what their mission is, sometimes it can be helpful to work backwards. So thinking about like, what is it that I want to do in the future? How did I get there, right? So thinking about the experiences that you've gone through that have made you want to do that thing. What values have those experiences taught you? What lessons have you learned or insights have you gained from those experiences that have led you to where you are now? And they don't have to be huge things, right? Sometimes they are, right? So for example, if I was working with a student who had a friend who had a seizure, and it really inspired him to want to do medicine, right? So it could be something big, right? But it could be something small too. I also had a student who was really interested in anthropology, and in his essay, he talked about being interested in the graffiti that was written on his locker and why people wanted to leave things behind and what you could tell about people from what they left behind, right? So moments big and small that have led to where you want to go in the future can be really great things to expand upon to round out your application narrative.
Fantastic. All right, so we'll dive a little bit more into how to ensure your application documents tell a cohesive story. So taking everything we've talked about so far, and how do you compile them together?
Awesome. So we want to create a journey, right, for the application committee to go on with you, right? So this is kind of speaking to what I was speaking about just a moment, but really thinking about like, where have you started? What events have you experienced? And where are you going? I think that sharing those little moments, both big and small, and sharing maybe even some vulnerable things. We have to remember that the admissions committee are human beings, right? And human beings love to hear about struggles. They love to hear stories, right? Since we have been, cave dwelling people, we have gotten together and told stories. So tell your story, right? Because that's what's going to grab the committee's attention. That's going to get them interested in who you are as a person. And ultimately, we advocate for people that we relate to. We advocate for people who are open and who are honest. And that's what you really need. You need to convince whoever is reading your application to advocate for you to the committee, to get them on your side. And we can do that really well by just telling our authentic story and being just open and honest.
Yeah, absolutely. And, as we were looking at the slide, I was just thinking about one of my absolute favorite essays of all time. It's a technique I've used with students before. So basically what you do is you come up with a vehicle that can kind of basically communicate lots of different things about them. So I had a girl one time, we had a dress code, but it didn't apply to shoes. So I noticed a lot of our students express themselves through their footwear. So she had these like really brightly colored shoes. So we talked about all the places the shoes took her and where, so she's in the science lab, she's on National Honor Society, she's at her part-time job, she's taking care of her younger siblings. So that's just one example, but I will never forget this essay. This just gives you an idea as to how you can communicate a lot. And it doesn't have to be this Napoleonic triumph or some, terrible failure. He starts off the essay. He says, look, I don't know what you're looking for in these essays. I don't know. I'm supposed to talk about myself. I just asked people what they thought about me, and here's what they said. Now, he wrote it. And I mean, but it was a little wink to the admissions officer. So his mom said, oh, my Jimmy's such a good big brother. He's such a great son. He always takes care of his younger siblings. He's always helping his younger brother with his homework. I can always rely on him. And then the father says, Jimmy wants to be a lawyer, but I think he should be a doctor like me. So that was like some parental trouble. And then it was like his coach is, he's the first on the field. He's the last to leave. And his girlfriend said, oh, he had the greatest promposal. It was so awesome. I loved it. And then it said, girl in my calculus class who doesn't like me. Jimmy's a loser. Don't let him into your school. So you hear from all these different people, and it's just little snippets, right? So just jab, jab, jab. He ends with his goldfish, who had this to say. Jimmy looks down on me from above and gives me food. I think Jimmy may be God. Funny. It was awesome. So you saw all these different aspects and all these different avenues, but the vehicle there was just what people thought about him. So it was creative. It was funny. We saw him in lots of different scenarios. We learned a lot about him. And that was it. And it was just kind of like a day in the life sort of thing. But, that can be a very effective thing. That's not the only way, of course, but that sometimes works for students. So.
All right. So now Dr. Nick has said this a couple times already, but show, don't tell.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, think about nouns and verbs communicate a lot more than adjectives. And I often tell students, think about the 5 senses, so when you walk into the veterinary clinic you're interning at, what does it smell like? What's the light look like? What are the dogs doing? What are those sorts of experiences? When you're working your part-time job at the Italian restaurant, what are the sort of things that you're experiencing? One of my favorite essays, to give you another topic, she was talking about her very first day being a server. And anyone who's ever worked at a restaurant, you have to that was one of my first jobs. You got to balance that tray, right? And her first table, she dumped the tray on her entire, first party. And, so we've all been like, I'm the new kid. I want to fit in. I hope I do a good job. And she just was very vulnerable. And it was kind of hysterical because we've all been in those situations. And that was her college essay. And we really, really liked it. It can be as simple as that. But definitely, you don't want to say, I'm a leader or I'm really committed to it. Don't say that. Show how you are. That's going to be a way more compelling essay.
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree. Showing, not telling is extremely important. And I think especially if you're writing about a challenge and you want to show yourself as having grit, as having perseverance, right? Then don't sometimes students fall into the trap of writing an essay that is 60% about like how hard the challenge was, and they really don't spend enough time talking about what they did about it in order to really show whatever quality or value or character trait they have, right? So really focus in on showing your actions if you are writing about a challenge to really show the best side of you.
Absolutely.
All right. And I think we've covered this a little bit too, but I think it's important. We're going to cover it again, but talk about all of your experiences, warts and all.
Yeah, for sure. I think this speaks a lot to the authenticity and vulnerability that we've been advocating for in your application. I also think that it's important to have some perspective. I think that it's important to write about your challenges, but that they should be compelling because there are students who have faced real challenges, and you might be one of them. But just know that, there are students, I've worked with students who, had a lot of trauma and, have been in foster care, right? That's a compelling challenge, right? I've worked with students who were taking care of a sick family member, right? To kind of explain, what they should have been. And I think it's important to understand that, like, when you're writing about challenges, they should be like real challenges, right? You don't want to write about, explain away your bad grade by, I watched too much TV, right? They should be really compelling challenges to put yourself in the best light and really demonstrate those qualities like we were talking before that you want to show.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this also can apply to Lara's recommendation. I think a lot of times students are worried that it has to be the teacher they got the A in the class. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's the teacher that gave you the B. Maybe it's the teacher that made you work a little harder. And you learn so much from that. Those are some of the best rec letters, actually. So think about what exactly are things that you've experienced and what you have to deal with it. But again, this is also where that show don't tell is so important. As aside from saying, oh, this was so hard and I worked so hard and this taught me time management or anything like that. Show how that experience was. So like, we've had students who've taken care of a loved one for one reason or the other. What is that like? How did that happen? I mean, what sort of things have you learned about it? Did it change your perspective on, what it's like to, care for somebody or what people go through in just humanity? That could be something really cool.
Yeah, I would also add, obviously reflecting and thinking about what you've learned from your experiences is really important, but you also want to make sure that you stay away from cliches. So, yes. For example, like if the lesson is if you work hard, you will succeed. Well, like everybody can say that, right? So make sure that you're not saying a cliche. Don't judge a book by its cover, right? That is overused, right? So make sure that sometimes it can help actually, if you're thinking about an experience that you've been through, think to yourself, like, what are the expected lessons I would learn from this? What are the cliches I could draw from this? And then do not use them, okay? Think about outside of the box. What can I say that is not one of the cliches that admissions is going to expect me to say, right? There's nothing more mind-numbing than reading essay after essay that is just full of cliches.
All right. Consider the whole application.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things here. So sometimes I've noticed that I've seen it on college message boards about college admissions, like Reddit type threads, that kind of thing. And they'll say, like, a student will like post all their stats and then they'll say, chance me. And I always think that's very bizarre because I'm like, who are you asking really? Like, yeah, I mean, who are these people that are like, experts? But all that to say, like, sometimes when their academic numbers aren't quite there, someone will immediately chime in, better have a good essay. And what I would say that I stole it from another counselor and I've used it for years. A good essay can cure the sick. It cannot raise the dead. So you can have the most amazing college essay in the entire world. It's just awesome. Everybody loves it. It's so great. But if your academic and extracurricular house are in order, that's not going to necessarily, carry you over. So all that to say, you have to also keep in mind that while the essay is important, it's a chance to talk about yourself. Everything else has also got to be, kind of on par with the selectivity of that institution. The other thing I would say just real quick, sometimes students want to show their essay to every person they meet, so it's like, I'll get, well, my dad likes it, my mom doesn't, or, you liked it, but my English teacher didn't, or there's too many cooks in the kitchen, right? My personal favorite is my mom's friend who's good at writing. So the chances are very good they have not read a college application essay. So all of us at Quad have already had this experience. I've read literally over 10,000 essays and worked with hundreds of them with students. So I've seen a little bit of it all. But all that to say, everyone's going to have an opinion, but you have to, like what I would say, like, trust the experts, not the noise. And that's exactly what we help our students with.
Yeah, I'll also just add, like, I feel like the activities list or the resume is one of the most like underutilized tools in your application. I think that if you are really strategic about how you write, about how you did your activities, it can make a huge difference, right? Using really strong, like, action verbs, using really specific accomplishments, like specific, like if you had a specific goal for amount of money you raised, including that specific number. The more specific you are with your accomplishments, the more you can highlight your leadership, the more that you can differentiate yourself, not just as somebody who participated, but somebody who really went out of their way to lead, to organize, to step up when things needed to get done, right? That is really a powerful tool in your arsenal when you're applying for college.
Absolutely.
All right, so we're gonna go over some tips and then we will dive right into the Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to start popping those into the Q&A chat box and we'll run through these tips.
All right, so maximizing your time and start planning early. Like, this is always my number one tip because I think students always underestimate how long this is going to take you. So here are some numbers, okay? College applications can typically take 60 or more hours of work, okay? You may be writing 30 or more individual essays. You got to take into account, right? You have your Common App essay, which is going to go through 4 to 5 drafts minimum. Then you're going to have probably 3 to 4 supplemental essays for each individual school you're applying to, right? So if you're applying to 8 schools, right, that is a whole lot of essays. Okay, so I always recommend you need to start in the summer. A lot of times students will be like, well, senior year doesn't really matter. I'll just do it in the fall. And that is a mistake because there's still a lot of things going on in the senior year. Like, hopefully you're still taking some AP classes. Hopefully you're still involved in a lot of activities because that matters also, right? And so you need to have that space to be creative, to have the time to really work on several drafts. So you need to make sure that you start early, right? That's like the number one tip. Don't be afraid to redraft. Like I said, many drafts. And you might try an idea and find that it's just not working. And you might need to go back to the drawing board, and that is okay. That is part of the process, right? You may not know if it's going to work until you try it. So you may want to write more than one and see which one you like better, which idea really flourishes on paper, right? So I would say definitely drafts and drafts and drafts. And then keep it simple. One of the most common pieces of advice I give to my students is simplify your sentences. I think sometimes students get into this mindset of like, well, if I use a lot of words, then I'm going to sound really smart. And then they'll want me at their college, and that's not how it works. You want to make sure that you are communicating as precisely, as concisely, as succinctly as possible. Whatever is the easiest, most direct way to get your message across, use that.
Absolutely. I mean, I couldn't agree with Erin more with the start planning early. I mean, this is something I feel like I say this to a lot of students whom I work with, where I say, hey, let's come up with a plan. Let's get this essay done and this essay done and that essay done and get this all ready right before senior year. And a lot of times they'll say, yeah, of course, I don't want to be stressed out. But then it's right after, the Christmas holiday and we're working on essays. And true story, this year, I had one of my senior moms and she says, oh my God, there's so much to do. When are they supposed to get this done? And I said as gently as I could, in July when they announced the prompts and we had a plan, like that's going to be really important. It'll make you so much less stressed out. The other thing with the redrafts, absolutely. I find that most students that I work with, some of them are really great essay writers, to be quite honest, and some of them we work a lot, a lot. It just kind of depends. Usually it's about 2 to 5 drafts back and forth. But I also think sometimes there's a mentality that the more edits, the better. But after like 5 or 6, you kind of we're kind of done. This is good. This is great. And the last thing I'll say, keep it simple. Like, Aaron and I are both highly educated people. If we have to like search what a word means a lot in your essay, like 1 or 2, sure, but a lot, that's probably too much. Don't use a $5 word when a 25-cent word will do.
Yeah, for sure. And I also think, once you start using sentences and words that you would never use in real life, like we lose your voice, right? We want to hear what you sound like. What would it be like if I had a conversation with you? Write to me as if we're having a conversation. I want to hear your personality come through your words.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, a couple more tips and then we'll jump into a couple Q&A questions.
So I think it's kind of getting back to what we talked about earlier, like remember what's already in their application. If you want to talk about like say a class or activity in great detail, that's fine, but it doesn't need to be a rehash of your resume. It doesn't have to be like, I took this and I challenged myself with this. And you want to make sure that you're using this because this is one of your last vehicles that you have a way to communicate something different. And also like all of us, no one's perfect. No one bats 1,000. No one wins every day. It's okay if you've had, challenges, and then that could be for all sorts of reasons. I've had students who have gone through personal challenges, whether those were medical or family or what have you. It could also be a natural disaster. That's happened too. So whatever those cases are, those are things that are okay to show them and say like, hey, this is what happened. Here's how I responded to it. But also like, be authentic. Like one thing Aaron had says, like, talk to me, right? So I often tell students, talk to grandma. It's formal but familiar. I'll never forget, I had a student one time in their, why us essay. He said, when I was conversing with students on campus, I don't know a single teenager who says conversing. That just sounds weird. When I was talking with students, when I was visiting with students, when I was hanging out with students, that's way more authentic. It's not this lofty thing. I think a lot of people have to realize that most admissions officers are kind of in their 20s. And even the ones who are older are not like these old fuddy-duddies who are all upset about one thing or the other. Just be a person, just talk, that's the thing. So, and that's one thing that we work with. Like when I say like, when I read your essay, I should hear your voice in the room. Because if I'm in committee and they say, we want you to present, which means partly read from their essay, I want your voice in the committee room. That's what we're trying to get across.
Fantastic.
Awesome. I think it's time for Q&A because we're a little short on time.
Yeah.
All right. So we have Dr. Nick and Aaron here who have a ton of experience. So ask anything that comes to mind. One question we just got is, since authenticity is important in crafting a good essay, if I write a thing or two about my bad qualities, would that be unwise?
I mean, I would say it depends. So it depends what the bad qualities are and also how you phrase those. But I mean, again, I think, I mentioned like, the student who dropped the entire plate of food in her first table. It's not necessarily a bad quality, but it's not a good quality. But that's something that could be funny and something where you can again show that you've all been there. So it kind of depends on what it is. So if you were to say to me like, well, I keep getting caught for academic dishonesty, I would not recommend you write about that. But if it was something like I'm always biting my nails and everyone's always telling me about it, that could be funny. That could work. It just kind of depends on what it is.
Yeah, I totally agree. You don't want to, I don't know. I always think like if it's something you wouldn't really want to share with your mom, like probably don't put it in an essay.
Yep, I agree with that.
Yeah, and in terms of vulnerability too, like there's kind of a fine line, is it like, I always say it's about a 7 out of 10. So like not 10, like cringy, like please don't share TMI, but you want to get personal.
Yeah, I would definitely say like, if you can think of 5 topics you would never, ever, ever, ever write about, chances are good Aaron or myself or both have seen them. Cool.
All right. Since writing essays in summer is recommended, when does the Common App open and when are you able to see the essay questions?
So
Well,
go ahead, Aaron, sorry.
Well, the topics have already been posted, but here's a little tip. At least for the Common App essay, don't pay attention to the topics because honestly, you're just writing an essay about yourself. Like all of the topics are like different ways of writing an essay by yourself about yourself. And then the last topic is literally write an essay about yourself. So you don't really need to wait for the topics to come out. Obviously, that is not true for the supplementals. The supplementals are very specific and you want to make sure that you read them very carefully and are addressing them directly. But in terms of the Common App, I would just go for it. They've been posted. I believe most of Nick, maybe you would know better than I, supplementals are posted. So like they're always posted by summer.
Yeah, Aaron said exactly what I was going to say. So the Common App, believe it or not, they really don't care which topic you choose. They have 6 thought jogger questions, talk about an academic experience and that kind of stuff. Topic 7 is topic of your own choice. You can write about anything, quite literally. But when it comes to the supplemental ones, they usually don't change much from year to year, if at all. But once the college says, here's the prompt for the 23-24 admission cycle, then you can go ahead and get started on that essay. As I was saying earlier with the mom, when are they supposed to do it? In the summer when they're posted? But the Common App, that's always the first step because it is astronomically unlikely that any of the students whom we work with are not applying to a Common App school. Another question came up, does the essay have a word limit? It's 650 words. You don't have to use all 650, and no human's going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, but the computer will cut you off after 650. Most of the essays that I've worked with students on are roughly 550 to the 650 limit. They're not really super concerned about the word count. I always say you can't give more than 650, but don't give them 200. So kind of in that range.
All right. Well, I think that brings us to an end for tonight. I want to thank everyone for joining us and keep an eye out in your inbox for a recording of this webinar in the coming days. Aaron, Dr. Nick, thank you both so much for all of your information and being here.
Thank you so much.
Great to have you. I hope everyone has a really great rest of their evening. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks, y'all.
Bye.
Bye.